The first person to lower his eyes wasn't my sister. It wasn't my parents. It wasn't even the pastor who had spent years calling him a blessing to this community. It was the man everyone in our church believed could do no wrong. He looked at me for exactly 3 seconds. Then he looked away. Because for the first time in 15 years, he knew I finally had proof. The courtroom wasn't crowded, but every seat was filled. Church elders, former choir members, families I'd grown up sitting beside every Sunday morning, people who used to hug me after service, people who had watched me grow from a shy little girl into a young woman, people who had stopped looking me in the eye the day they decided I was lying. Outside, local news vans lined the courthouse steps. Not because I was important, because the man sitting at the defense table had spent nearly 2 decades building a reputation no one thought could ever fall. To them, he wasn't just another church member. He organized food drives. He led Bible studies. He donated thousands of dollars to struggling families. Every Christmas, he bought presents for children whose parents couldn't afford them. When tornadoes hit nearby counties, he was one of the first volunteers loading trucks with supplies. People called him the heart of our church. Some even called him God's servant. I called him something very different. The reason my family stopped believing me, I tightened my grip on the worn leather binder resting on my lap. Inside were photographs, bank records, old emails, a journal I had kept since I was 19, and one audio recording that should have changed everything 15 years ago. My phone vibrated. Emily calling. My sister. I stared at her name until the screen went dark. 30 seconds later, another message appeared. Please, don't let them hear it. I almost smiled. 15 years earlier, I had begged her for almost the exact opposite. Please listen to me. Please believe me. Please don't leave me alone. She hadn't. Instead, she chose him, the man everyone in church admired, the man who always knew the right Bible verse, the man who prayed the loudest, the man who cried during sermons, the man everyone insisted was incapable of hurting anyone. Looking back now, I should have realized something. Sometimes people don't believe the nicest person. They believe the person with the nicest reputation. And reputations can become idols, especially inside communities that desperately want someone to admire. The courtroom doors opened. The judge entered. Everyone stood. As I looked across the room, I saw my sister sitting only 2 seats away from the man she had defended for half her life. Not beside me. Never beside me. Her hands were shaking. My parents sat behind her. My mother held a tissue so tightly it had nearly fallen apart. My father looked 10 years older than the last time I'd seen him. The clerk stood and announced that newly discovered evidence had been admitted into the record. A quiet murmur spread across the courtroom. Then I heard the defense attorney whisper to his client, "There's no way to explain this anymore." The color drained from the so-called church hero's face, because the secret he had hidden behind kindness, charity, and Sunday sermons was finally about to be heard by everyone who had once called him a righteous man. But to understand why my own sister chose him over me, you have to go back to the Sunday when I believed our church was the safest place in the world. I had no idea it was where my life would begin falling apart. I grew up believing church was the safest place on earth. Not because the building itself was special. It was an old red brick church with stained glass windows that rattled whenever the wind blew too hard. What made it feel safe were the people. Or at least, that's what I believed. My name is Grace Mitchell. I was the younger of 2 daughters. My sister, Emily, was 3 years older than me. If I was quiet, Emily was fearless. If I preferred reading in the church library, Emily loved standing on stage singing with the worship team. People adored her. Teachers described her as kind. Neighbors called her dependable. She was the daughter everyone wished they had. I never resented that. In fact, I admired her. Growing up, Emily was more than my sister. She was my best friend. Every Friday night, we'd stay awake whispering about our dreams. She wanted to become an elementary school teacher. I dreamed of becoming a social worker. I want to help kids who don't have anyone, I once told her. Emily smiled. You always want to save everybody. I can't save everybody, but maybe I can help one person. She squeezed my hand. That's enough. Those words stayed with me for years. Our parents weren't wealthy. Dad worked as an electrician. Mom managed the church office part-time while taking care of us. We didn't have expensive vacations or fancy cars, but we had dinner together almost every night. We prayed together, volunteered together. Every Thanksgiving, our family helped organize meals for people who had nowhere else to go. Mom often reminded us, character is what you do when nobody's watching. Back then, I believed every adult around me lived by those words, especially the people inside our church. By the time I turned 19, I had started studying social work at the local community college. Money was tight, so I worked evenings at a bookstore downtown. I loved listening to people's stories. Single mothers trying to finish school, retired veterans looking for history books, teenagers searching for college guides. Everyone carried burdens, invisible to everyone else. It made me more compassionate, less judgmental. Ironically, those same qualities would later make people think I was too naive. Every Sunday after church, our family stayed for coffee hour in the fellowship hall. That's where I got to know David Harper. If you asked anyone in town who David was, they'd all tell the same story. He changed this church, and in many ways, he had. Attendance doubled after he started leading outreach programs. The church food pantry expanded. A scholarship fund helped dozens of students, including me, buy textbooks. Families struggling to pay rent often found anonymous donations waiting for them. Everyone assumed those gifts came from David. He never corrected them. He always smiled modestly and said, "God deserves the credit." People loved him even more for that. He remembered everyone's birthday. He visited sick members in the hospital. He prayed with grieving families at funerals. He seemed to know exactly what to say when people were hurting. Even I admired him. At first, he often encouraged my dream of becoming a social worker. "You have a good heart, Grace," he'd tell me. "The world needs people like you." I'd thank him politely. Nothing about him felt unusual. Nothing made me uncomfortable. Looking back now, I wish I'd trusted the tiny moments that didn't quite make sense. The way his smile disappeared whenever someone challenged him. How church elders always defended him before anyone finished asking a question. The strange look he'd give people who disagreed with him during meetings. The way conversations suddenly ended whenever I walked into the office hallway. I convinced myself I was imagining things. After all, how could everyone else be wrong? Emily admired him even more than I did. "He reminds me of Grandpa," she once told me after Sunday service. "Always putting everyone else first." I smiled. "Yeah, he really is one of the good ones." I nodded. "I think so." If someone had told me that afternoon that David Harper would one day destroy my relationship with my own sister, I would have laughed. Because I believed something that millions of people still believe today. That kindness seen in public always reflects character in private. I couldn't have been more wrong, and I didn't realize it. Until one rainy Wednesday evening, when I accidentally walked into a conversation that was never meant for me. It was raining so hard that Wednesday night that most people left Bible study early. Emily had stayed behind to help organize the children's classrooms. Mom was balancing receipts in the church office. Dad had already gone home after fixing a faulty light in the fellowship hall. I was only there because Emily had forgotten her car keys. "I'll be right back," I told her. "They're probably still in the choir room." She smiled. "You're the best." I hurried down the quiet hallway. The church felt different after everyone left. Without children laughing or people talking, every footstep echoed through the building. As I walked past the finance office, I heard raised voices. Not shouting, but tense enough to make me slow down. One voice belonged to David Harper. The other belonged to Mr. Reynolds, the church treasurer. "I told you those numbers don't match," Mr. Reynolds whispered. "They don't have to. They absolutely do. If anyone audits these records—" David interrupted him. "No one is auditing anything." I frowned. The office door wasn't fully closed. Only an inch. Just enough for their voices to carry into the hallway. Mr. Reynolds sounded nervous. "I'm not comfortable signing those reports. You already did." I signed the original reports. "Not these." David laughed softly. "You worry too much." "I'm serious. Money from the scholarship fund is missing." My heart skipped. Scholarship fund? The same fund that had helped dozens of students, including me. David's voice became colder. "Lower your voice." "I won't. Parents trusted us. So did those kids." A chair scraped loudly across the floor. Then David spoke again. "What exactly are you planning to do?" "I'm going to tell the elders." There was a long silence. Finally, David answered. I wouldn't. Something about those two words made the hair on my arms stand up. Not angry. Not loud. Calm. Far too calm. Mr. Reynolds sighed. I've known you 15 years. I never thought. You don't know as much as you think. I realized I shouldn't be listening. This wasn't my business. I turned to leave. That's when my elbow bumped a decorative vase sitting on a small table beside the wall. It wobbled. I caught it before it hit the floor. But it still made enough noise. The office door opened immediately. David stepped into the hallway. He smiled the moment he saw me. Grace. His voice sounded warm again. Didn't know anyone was still here. I was looking for Emily's keys. He nodded slowly. Did you hear anything? I hesitated. Just voices. What were you talking about? For the first time since I'd known him, his smile didn't reach his eyes. Oh, nothing important. Just church budgeting. Mr. Reynolds walked out behind him. He looked pale, almost frightened. He opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something. Instead, he quietly picked up his coat and walked away without looking at either of us. David watched him leave, then turned back toward me. Grace, can I give you a little advice? Sure. He smiled again. The church survives because people trust each other. I nodded. I know. Sometimes hearing half a conversation creates unnecessary misunderstandings. I wasn't trying to listen. I know. He gently placed a hand on my shoulder. Let's keep tonight between us. It wasn't a threat. At least, not one I recognized at the time. I agreed. Of course. He smiled. I knew you were a reasonable young woman. Looking back now, that was the first mistake I made. I confused manipulation with kindness. The following Sunday, Mr. Reynolds wasn't at church. Emily noticed first. That's strange. He never misses. Mom shrugged. He said he wasn't feeling well. David offered the closing prayer that morning. His voice cracked with emotion. He asked everyone to pray for people struggling with personal burdens. The congregation nodded sympathetically. Several people wiped away tears. I found myself watching him instead of praying. Something felt off. After the service, I asked Mom about Mr. Reynolds. She smiled politely. Oh, he decided to step down. So suddenly? Health reasons. That didn't sound right. Later that afternoon, I called Mr. Reynolds. Straight to voicemail. I tried again Monday. Nothing. Tuesday. Nothing. By Friday, his phone had been disconnected. I drove past his house after work. The mailbox was empty. The curtains were gone. A neighbor watering flowers looked over at me. Looking for the Reynolds family? Yes. They moved. So quickly? She shrugged. Packed up almost overnight. Didn't even say goodbye. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. People don't usually leave their homes with less than a week's notice. Especially not people who had lived there for 28 years. That evening, I mentioned it during dinner. Dad barely looked up from his plate. Sometimes people need a fresh start. But don't you think it's strange? Mom answered before he could. Grace. Not everything is a mystery. Emily laughed softly. You've been reading too many detective novels. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was imagining connections that didn't exist. I wanted to believe that. I really did. But 2 weeks later, I received an anonymous envelope in the mail. Inside was a single photocopied bank statement from the church scholarship fund. Several large withdrawals had been circled in red ink. At the bottom of the page, someone had handwritten 6 words. Ask David where it went. In that moment, I realized the conversation I'd overheard hadn't been an accident. Someone knew I had heard enough to start asking questions. I just didn't know yet. Those questions were about to cost me my family. I should have thrown the envelope away. Looking back, maybe my life would have been easier if I had. But I couldn't stop thinking about Mr. Reynolds. About the fear in his eyes. About the words I had overheard. Money from the scholarship fund is missing. I decided to do the one thing I thought any honest person would do. I asked questions. That Sunday after church, I waited until most people had left before walking over to David. He was stacking chairs with 3 teenage volunteers. As always, he smiled when he saw me. Grace, how's school going? Good. I was hoping I could ask you something. Of course. The boys carried the last stack of chairs into the storage room, leaving us alone. I reached into my purse and pulled out the photocopied bank statement. His smile disappeared for less than a second. Then it came back. What is this? It came in the mail. I don't know who sent it. I thought maybe you could explain these withdrawals. He glanced at the paper, then calmly folded it in half. Someone is trying to cause trouble. So the withdrawals aren't real? They're taken out of context. What context? He handed the paper back. Church finances are complicated. I'm sure they are. But scholarship money shouldn't just disappear. His expression hardened. Grace, be careful. Careful about what? People who spread rumors can unintentionally hurt innocent lives. I'm not spreading rumors. I'm asking questions. He smiled again. The same gentle smile everyone admired. I know your heart. You want to help. But sometimes, curiosity becomes gossip. For some reason, those words made me feel guilty, as though I had done something wrong simply by asking. I apologized. I didn't mean to accuse anyone. I know. He gently patted my shoulder. Let's leave church matters to church leadership. I nodded, but something inside me still felt unsettled. 3 days later, my sister showed up at my apartment unexpectedly. She looked upset. Grace. What happened? She walked inside without waiting for an invitation. Did you confront David? My stomach dropped. Who told you that? He did. Of course he did. Emily crossed her arms. Why would you do that? I only asked about the scholarship fund. You accused him. I didn't. He said you implied he was stealing. I never said that. Emily shook her head. Grace, David has helped this family more times than you even know. What does that have to do with whether the money is missing? She looked frustrated. You're missing the point. No. I think everyone else is. She sighed deeply. You're becoming obsessed. Obsessed? I received an anonymous bank statement. So? So someone wanted people to know something. Or someone wanted to destroy David. I stared at my own sister. You actually think that's more likely? I think people attack good men all the time. And I think David deserves better. Those words hurt more than I expected. Not because she defended him. Because she defended him without asking a single question about me. The following Sunday, something happened that changed everything. Halfway through the morning service, Pastor Allen invited me into his office. David was already there. So were 2 church elders. Pastor Allen folded his hands. Grace, we've received some concerns. What kind of concerns? Several members say you've been making serious accusations. I asked one person one question. David looked genuinely saddened. I told them she was probably just confused. Confused. The exact same word. Again, Pastor Allen spoke gently. David doesn't want this to become a bigger issue. I'm not trying to make it one. Then perhaps you should let it go. What if there's actually something wrong? One elder interrupted. Young lady, do you have proof? I looked down at the photocopied statement. No. Then all you have is suspicion. I have questions. Questions without evidence can damage reputations. Reputations. There it was again. Not truth. Not accountability. Reputations. David quietly added, I forgive her. Forgive me? I hadn't done anything. I looked at my pastor. You actually believe I owe him an apology? Before Pastor Allen could answer, the office door opened. Emily walked in. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. Oh, Grace, please, just apologize. I stared at her. You too? She nodded. This has gone far enough. No, it hasn't even begun. She took my hands. Please, don't destroy our church over rumors. Our church? What about your sister? I am thinking about you. No, you're thinking about him. Her voice cracked. Because I know the kind of man he is. I slowly pulled my hands away. No, Emily. You know the version of him you've decided to believe. By the following week, the rumors had spread throughout the congregation. Not that David might be hiding something. That I was unstable. That college stress had affected my judgment. That I had become jealous of David's influence. Parents stopped asking me to help with children's ministry. The bookstore where I worked received anonymous complaints claiming I was dishonest. My supervisor called me into her office. I don't know what's going on, but customers are asking questions. Within 2 weeks, my hours were cut nearly in half. Money became tight. I fell behind on rent. Then I overheard something I will never forget. Late one evening, I returned to my parents' house to pick up a few boxes. My sister and mother were talking in the kitchen. Emily whispered, "Maybe Grace should stop coming to church for a while." Mom Sahil. It might help people move on. I stood frozen outside the doorway. My own family had decided. The easiest way to protect the church's hero was to quietly remove me. And heartbreaking as that was, I still had no idea that someone had been secretly collecting evidence for years. Evidence that would eventually expose not only David, but everyone who chose his reputation over the truth. I stopped going to church 2 weeks later. Not because I had lost my faith, because I couldn't survive another Sunday watching people smile at the man who had quietly destroyed my life. The hardest part wasn't walking away from the building. It was realizing that the people inside it had become more loyal to a man's reputation than to the truth. Looking back now, I understand something I couldn't understand then. Faith and people are not the same thing. People fail. Truth doesn't. Without enough hours at the bookstore, I had to make a decision. Either stay in town and keep fighting rumors, or leave before they consumed the rest of my life. At 20 years old, it felt like the hardest decision I'd ever made. I packed everything I owned into my old sedan. A few boxes of books, some clothes, my laptop, and one small journal. The journal I'd been writing in ever since the night I overheard David and Mr. Reynolds arguing. Every strange conversation, every rumor, every meeting, every detail. I didn't know why I kept writing. Something inside me simply refused to let the truth disappear. My parents helped me carry the last boxes. Mom cried quietly. Dad hugged me longer than usual. Neither of them asked me to stay. Emily didn't come at all. Before I got into my car, Dad said softly, "I hope someday you'll understand why everyone reacted the way they did." I looked at him for a long moment. I understand. He looked relieved. I understand that believing someone is easier than questioning them. His shoulders dropped, but that doesn't make it right. Then I drove away. I cried for nearly 2 hours before I finally reached the interstate. Not because I missed the town, because I missed the family I thought I had. I moved to Indianapolis. It wasn't glamorous. My apartment was barely 600 square feet. The refrigerator hummed so loudly I could hear it from the bedroom. I worked mornings at a nonprofit organization helping foster children. At night, I waited tables. Money was tight. Some months I wasn't sure how I'd pay rent. But every child I helped reminded me why I'd chosen social work. Broken trust wasn't the end of a person's story. Sometimes, it was the beginning of a stronger one. Slowly, life became peaceful again. I finished my degree, earned my social work license, eventually became a child advocacy specialist. Ironically, the girl no one believed grew into a woman whose entire career centered on believing children when no one else would. Every time a frightened teenager whispered, "No one believes me," I remembered exactly how that felt, and I promised myself they would never hear those words from me. Over the years, my relationship with my family became polite, but distant. Birthday cards, Christmas texts, the occasional phone call. Emily always avoided talking about church. David's name was never mentioned. It was as if everyone had silently agreed to erase that chapter from our lives. I let them. Not because I'd forgotten, because I was tired. Sometimes healing means choosing peace over proving you're right. At least, that's what I believed. But I was wrong. The past wasn't finished with me. 15 years after I left town, I received an unexpected phone call. The caller ID displayed a number from my hometown. I almost ignored it. Instead, I answered, "Grace Mitchell?" "Yes, my name is Thomas Reynolds." The name hit me like a bolt of lightning. "Mr. Reynolds, son." My heart started racing. "I've been looking for you for a very long time." I gripped the phone tighter. "Why?" His voice broke. "Because my father died last month." I closed my eyes. "I'm so sorry." "Before he passed away, he left a box with your name on it." Silence. Then Thomas whispered the words that changed everything. He said, "If Grace ever opens this box, the truth will finally have a chance." In that moment, I realized my story hadn't ended 15 years earlier. It had only been waiting for someone brave enough to finish telling it. I drove back to my hometown the following Saturday. 15 years had passed. The streets looked smaller. The church parking lot looked older. Even the giant oak tree where Emily and I used to eat ice cream after Sunday service seemed less impressive than I remembered. Memory has a strange way of making places feel larger than they really are. Thomas Reynolds was waiting for me outside a small law office. He looked almost exactly like his father. Same gray eyes. Same calm voice. Same habit of rubbing the back of his neck whenever he was nervous. He held a weathered cardboard box against his chest. Grace? I nodded. I'm sorry we had to meet like this. So am I. He looked down at the box. My father never stopped feeling guilty. Guilty? He believed he abandoned you. My throat tightened. He didn't. Thomas shook his head. He thought he did. We sat together inside the conference room. Very carefully, he placed the box on the table. My father told me to give this to you only if David Harper was still being treated like a hero. And if he wasn't? He told me to burn it. I stared at the worn tape sealing the lid. What is it? Thomas took a slow breath. Everything. Inside were dozens of folders. Original church financial reports. Canceled checks. Donation ledgers. Copies of scholarship applications. Several handwritten journals. And one thick envelope marked in red ink. Open last. I looked at Thomas. My father kept all of this? He copied everything before resigning. Why didn't he go to the police? Thomas looked ashamed. Because David threatened our family. The same thing happened to me. Thomas nodded. I know. He knew exactly how to manipulate people. My hands trembled as I flipped through the documents. Every missing dollar had been tracked. Every altered report highlighted. Every forged signature compared to the originals. There was no doubt anymore. David Harper had been stealing money from the church scholarship fund for years. But that wasn't the biggest surprise. Thomas quietly slid another folder toward me. You should read this. Inside were copies of confidential letters exchanged between church elders. The first one made my stomach drop. We cannot allow these accusations to become public. David is too important to the church. Another letter. Even if questions remain, protecting the ministry must come first. Another. Grace Mitchell's concerns appear sincere, but public confidence is more important at this time. I stopped reading. They knew? Thomas nodded slowly. Not everything, but enough to investigate. They chose not to. I leaned back in my chair. For 15 years, I had blamed only David. Now I realized something even more painful. Some people hadn't been deceived. They had simply decided protecting the church mattered more than protecting the truth. Looking back now, that realization hurt more than David's betrayal ever did. Then I opened the envelope, marked open last. Inside was a flash drive. Only one sentence was written across the front. He never knew I recorded this, Thomas whispered. My father recorded one of their meetings. My pulse quickened. I plugged the flash drive into my laptop. The audio crackled. Then voices filled the room. David spoke first. Grace is becoming a problem. Another elder answered. She's just a college kid. David laughed softly. Exactly. No one will choose her over me. Someone else asked, what about Emily? David chuckled. She already believes whatever I tell her. My heart sank. The recording continued. As long as her sister trusts me. Grace stands alone. There was a long pause. Then came the sentence that changed everything. People don't protect the truth. They protect whoever makes them feel righteous. Silence filled the room after the recording ended. Thomas looked at me. My father listened to that recording hundreds of times. He always said, those words explained everything. Tears blurred my vision. For 15 years. I thought I'd lost because I wasn't convincing enough. Because I didn't have enough proof. Because I wasn't strong enough. But I had never been fighting evidence. I had been fighting something far more dangerous. People's need to believe in their own version of goodness. 3 months later, the state attorney's office officially reopened the investigation. Financial crimes. Fraud. Embezzlement. Witness intimidation. Multiple former church employees came forward. Then, one by one, families who had stayed silent for years began telling their own stories. People David had manipulated. Volunteers he had threatened. Young members whose concerns had been quietly dismissed. The church's hero wasn't just losing his reputation. An entire system of silence was collapsing around him. And my sister. was about to discover that the man she had defended for 15 years had been using her loyalty from the very beginning. The trial lasted 8 days. By then, David Harper was no longer being called the heart of our church. Newspapers had found another title for him: former church leader, accused of stealing millions in charitable donations. People who once defended him now claimed they had always had doubts. I didn't believe that. Memory has a way of changing itself when the truth becomes impossible to ignore. I wasn't there to watch David fall. I was there because, for the first time in 15 years, someone had finally asked me to tell the truth instead of stay quiet. When the prosecutor called my name, the courtroom became silent. I walked to the witness stand without looking at David. I had spent too many years allowing him to occupy space in my mind. He didn't deserve another second. After taking the oath, the prosecutor asked me one simple question. "Miss Mitchell, why did you come forward all those years ago?" I looked toward the jury. Because I believed the church should protect the truth before it protects anyone's reputation. No one moved. No one interrupted. So I continued. I wasn't trying to destroy a good man. I was trying to stop a dishonest one. The prosecutor handed me the photocopied bank statement I had received anonymously 15 years earlier. "Do you recognize this?" "Yes." "It's the first piece of evidence that made me realize something was terribly wrong." "And what happened after you asked questions?" I smiled sadly. "I lost almost everything. My church, my friends, my sister, my family's trust, my hometown. But I never lost the truth." Thomas Reynolds testified after me. Then came forensic accountants, former church employees. Even 2 retired elders admitted under oath that concerns about missing funds had been quietly dismissed years earlier. One of them lowered his head and said, "We believed protecting the church was protecting God." The prosecutor answered calmly, "No, you were protecting a man." The courtroom fell completely silent. David finally took the stand in his own defense. He looked older than his 63 years. His voice no longer carried the confidence that had once captivated entire congregations. For nearly 3 hours he blamed everyone else: the treasurer, poor bookkeeping, economic confusion, misunderstandings, former employees, even May. At one point he looked directly toward the jury. "Grace has hated me for years." I almost laughed. The prosecutor stood. Permission to play Exhibit 47. The judge nodded. The recording began. David's own voice echoed through the courtroom. "No one will choose her over me." A few jurors exchanged glances. Then came the sentence that destroyed everything. People don't protect the truth. They protect whoever makes them feel righteous. When the recording ended, David didn't deny saying it. He simply closed his eyes. For the first time, silence abandoned him. The verdict came the following afternoon. Guilty. On every count: fraud, embezzlement, financial exploitation, witness intimidation, evidence tampering. The judge looked directly at him before announcing the sentence. "You didn't merely steal money. You stole trust. And that may be the greater crime." David was sentenced to more than 20 years in prison. As deputies escorted him away, he briefly turned toward the gallery. Our eyes met. For 15 years, I'd imagined what I might say if that moment ever came. Instead, I said nothing, because the truth had already spoken louder than I ever could. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded anyone connected to the case. I ignored every microphone. There was only one conversation that mattered. Emily was standing alone beneath the courthouse steps. She looked exhausted, older, smaller somehow. When she saw me, tears immediately filled her eyes. "I don't expect you to forgive me." I remained quiet. She took a shaky breath. "He manipulated me." "I know. He told me you were jealous." "I know. He said you wanted attention." "I know." She began crying harder. I believed him. That was the first completely honest sentence I'd heard from my sister in 15 years. I chose him. Because believing you would have meant admitting I was wrong. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, she whispered, "I lost 15 years with my sister." I nodded slowly. "So did I." She reached for my hand. This time, I didn't pull away, but I didn't hold on tightly either. Some relationships don't heal in a single conversation. They heal one honest moment at a time. As we stood together outside the courthouse, I realized something. David hadn't just stolen money from our church. He had stolen years from families who trusted him. The difference was, those years could never be returned, only mourned. And finally, learned from. People often ask me if justice healed everything. The honest answer is, no. Justice closed a chapter. It didn't erase it. There are still moments when I drive past a church and remember how safe I once felt walking through those doors. There are still Sunday mornings when I think about the friendships that disappeared without a single conversation. There are still days when I wonder what my life might have looked like if my sister had believed me the very first time I asked. But I've stopped asking that question as often, because I've learned something much more important. The people who refuse to believe you don't get to decide who you become. Today, I still work as a child advocacy specialist. Every time a frightened child whispers, "No one believes me," I remember exactly how those words feel. And every single time, I answer the same way. I believe you. Not because every accusation is automatically true, but because every person deserves to be heard before they're judged. Emily and I are rebuilding our relationship. Slowly. Painfully. Some wounds leave scars that never completely disappear. But scars are different from open wounds. They remind us where we've been, not where we have to stay. If this journey taught me anything, it's that faith should never require silence. Real faith isn't afraid of difficult questions. Real love doesn't demand blind loyalty. And real character isn't measured by how loudly people praise you on Sunday. It's measured by what you do when no one is watching. Because reputations can fool entire communities. But the truth has a way of surviving long enough to find the people willing to hear it. If you've stayed with me until the end of this story, thank you. Now I'd really like to hear your thoughts. If you were in Grace's position, what would you have done? Would you have kept fighting to expose the truth, even after your own family stopped believing you? Or would you have walked away and never looked back? And here's another question that's been on my mind. Do you think Emily deserves forgiveness after finally admitting she was wrong? Or are some betrayals simply too deep to repair? Share your opinion in the comments below. Your perspective might help someone who's struggling with a similar situation in their own life. If you enjoy emotional family drama, revenge stories, hidden family secrets, and true-to-life stories about betrayal, justice, and second chances, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. We share new stories every week. Stories that remind us that lies can last for years, but the truth has a way of finding the light. Until next time, take care of yourself, and never let someone else's reputation become more important than your own conscience.